Hi everybody, today we're here with Florence Davidson and I'm really excited to put it out there so that you can hear her message because it's a wonderful one. So Florence, if you could just begin by telling us a little bit about you and your background so that people can begin to connect with you, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, well, thank you for the intro, and I'm really very happy to be here. So thank you for inviting me. I think of myself as a scientist, even though I don't currently work in science anymore, but I trained in it. I really had my whole focus of self-identity on science for many, many years. I became a researcher at a very prestigious institute after working very hard to get onto the tenure track. And along the way, had to break through quite a few glass ceilings to get there because the level to which I aspired and actually finally arrived was one where less than 1% of people with those jobs are women. So as you might imagine, I was dealing with a lot of stress. Then there was a span of about 5 years where all of the major stressors that can happen in a person's life all happened boom, 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 simultaneously, or one right after the other. And I took one of those little stress tests, you know, the questionnaires. And being a good scientist, I didn't look at the answers, right? I just, filled in all my blanks and summed up the numbers. And my score was 465. And then I looked at the scale of what the numbers were supposed to mean. And it said that 99 was paralyzing stress. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, because at the point where I was doing this, I had actually burned out and I was no longer able to work. And when I saw that number, I thought, well, A, good for you for being able to manage that much stress for so long. B, you better do something about it. And that's, I think, really the launching off point for what I was intending to talk about today. So I have a Ph.D. in biochemistry. I worked in biochemistry, biophysics, cell biology, and genetics. My research lab was studying mechanisms of neural degeneration using Drosophila as a genetic model for retinal degeneration for a condition in humans. And we did some exciting research, but at a certain point it all came to, I wouldn't say exactly a crashing end because there was a period of burnout, but I ultimately had to close the doors of my lab and thinking that I was going to take a few months to recover and get back in the game. And now it's about 11 years later. So now I actually work in helping people to, you could say, recover from all kinds of different conditions. I came across really robust, helpful mechanisms when I was engaging in my own recovery. And one of the things that I want to talk about today is mystery illness. But the things that I wanted to talk about, that I chose to talk about today, I chose on the basis of wanting them to be helpful to anybody, whether you're dealing with these specific conditions or something different, whether you have a mystery illness or you know somebody who has, or that's just not even your issue. And so I'm looking forward to sharing with you some of the things that I've discovered along the way.
Yeah, and there's, you know so much through your own experience. I think sometimes your own experiences are the best teachers, aren't they?
Yes.
In what you know. Yeah. But as Florence said, she does have a science background, so we are going to be discussing the topic of, as she's already mentioned, mystery illnesses and other conditions that are often thought to be difficult for people and sometimes even impossible to deal with in order to turn them around. Now, these can include depression, anxiety, anger issues, PTSD, stress, overwhelm, chronic disease, burnout, which has already been mentioned. So in regards to all these things, what is your most important kind of take-home message for everybody around these things?
Okay. This I'm really glad to share, and I'll aim to remember to say it again at the end. But just to take it in, I'm going to invite everybody to take a nice full breath and release it. Maybe close your eyes to help it sink in. There is hope. There is hope. No matter what you're dealing with, no matter where you are with it, no matter what you've been told could happen, there is hope. And this is particularly important because when we have something, some challenge that we're struggling with, there are optimistic ways to look at it. There are pessimistic ways to look at it. But whatever we believe is the thing that tends to unfold. I know that in the case of menstrual illnesses and PTSD, which are both things that I've recovered from, that I was told directly by people I thought of as experts that I would never recover. Nowadays, my PTSD was diagnosed quite a while ago, but nowadays I think fewer therapists and doctors are saying that, but I still hear of people being told that they will never be rid of it and they will only ever be able to manage it at best. And then in the case of certain menstrual illnesses like fibromyalgia, I'm still finding people posting on support sites that they've just been told that they have it and that it'll never get better and it will only get worse. And I just want to emphasize and double underline, don't believe that. It is absolutely possible to recover, even recover fully from these conditions and many others, right? If you know the things that have worked for other people, those are good bets for things to try. I can only speak from my own experience about some of these things, and I'm more than happy to share it. But the most important thing is don't lose hope. If you find yourself feeling depressed and sad, it's normal to go through that, and then latch on to hope again. Especially when you're dealing with experts who aren't saying what I'm saying. So there are doctors out there who will say, absolutely, believe the best because that's what you'll get, you know. But I've seen both in my own experience and also in that of my clients that very often somehow just going to see the doctor and asking about, you know, what's going on with you, it's very common to come away with a kind of downcast pall on your emotional tone. And I won't go into the reasons for that. It's not trying to psychoanalyze the medical profession, right? But it's a phenomenon that really does happen. And when I started going through that myself, I was like, whoa, look at this. It's good that I'm experiencing this because it gives me more understanding what my clients are dealing with. But there's always hope. Absolutely always hope.
And you really touched on an important point there, because so many almost believe every word that comes out of a doctor's mouth because they see them as all knowing, but at the end of the day they are human like everybody else and they don't know everything. So it's always good to look everywhere for your answers to things.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the most important things that I realized, and I think that it helps other people too, is to recognize that when you're dealing with a protracted, long-lasting or chronic condition, the experts, medical doctors, other kinds of practitioners, can be of enormous, even necessary assistance. And yet, it's important to temper your faith in their knowledge base with a certain level of optimism and hope, but don't wait forever, right? So you may have a condition where you're lucky that they can diagnose what's going on and give you a very straightforward solution, and you do it and you're better, and that's great. But when that's not your situation, whether it be a state of not well-being that is mental or physical or both, and all of these things follow the mind-body connection, so there's always some of both. It's very important to recognize that you are your own healer, and the best that anybody can do is give you assistance in healing yourself. And so it's important to respect and acknowledge and be grateful for any help you get without making them the expert, your higher power. And to recognize that the most important and powerful healer is actually within you, and what our bodies do best when we give them the right conditions is to heal. So that's actually under your purview rather than anyone else's.
Yeah, I mean, I have a number of stories, but I'm just going to just say one of them actually, because it's almost sometimes like when it's long-term illness, it's as though they have a picture that they give you that this is how you're going to be, because it's what they give you that picture. But it's only a picture, and it's their picture. You don't have to accept that picture. Mm-hmm. You can choose, and this is important, you can choose how your journey unfolds for you. This is, and I know people that have, been told they've only got weeks to live, and they've made the choice in hearing that news that they want life. And they've done nothing more than go into their heart space and say, oh, please, God, I want to live. And I've got so much I want to do, and I want to do this, 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 and this, and whatever it is. And they just feel a whole, an energy go whoop through their body. And they end up, not immediately, but they end up in total remission. And I know people that have done this, to total astonishment of the doctors and whatever, the experts. But what I'm saying is, what that story says is it's all about choices and how you choose to accept any news and work with it. And it's having an open mind and an open heart to all possibilities of assistance as well.
Yes, and may I make just one comment about that, which is that when the specter of this whatever that you perceive as a bad thing arises, very often in trying to adhere to the advice we're giving, and I've myself done this, there's a tendency to kind of get very rigid and push it away, right? Mm-hmm. And therefore it just pushes back stronger, because law of awareness, that which you're willing to be with in consciousness changes, that which you resist persists, pushes back. So whatever your deepest fear is, for example, for me, there was a point where, because I used to be all about work, right? There was a point where the inability to work and the potential projection of what that could bring about was unfolding and unspooling. And I thought, oh my God, I could end up on the streets, a bag lady, and, no resources whatsoever. Thankfully, that hasn't happened. But I let myself imagine being there. I didn't dwell in it. I didn't pickle myself in it. I didn't stay in it forever, but I let myself mentally go there for a few moments, right? And I fell asleep that night. I had a dream about a beloved dog of mine who was 112 pounds, big guy. In the dream, I was curled up on the sidewalk, no home, nothing, right? And my dog came and lay down, and I rested my head on him. And I knew I was safe because he was there. And then the tension went away, and I was able to, get up the next day and be in that more expanded state that helps us actually deal with what we're confronting. So I recommend that if there's something that's persistently bugging you in the way of a fear of what's going to happen, or what somebody has told you that's going to happen, but you don't want to accept it, doing what you just said is fantastic, kind of going inside, saying, no, what I really want is, And if that other thing continues to hammer at your door, just let yourself be with it for a moment until the contraction releases and you can come back into that more expanded state.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Now, I guess touch on now on another topic that you spoke about earlier, which is the mystery illnesses. What do you mean by that? And how did you become interested in the topic? And any stubborn challenges and things that were come up around it?
Yes. Well, a mystery illness is what its name suggests. That the important thing to remember is that these are illnesses that are real, right? I myself have been told by a doctor it's all in your head. Fortunately, I had the background to say, yes, it's in my head, and that's what makes it real, right? Because I'm not just imagining. What he was inferring, which was not true, was that I was imagining it. So these are illnesses where there is some set of symptoms, and I'll mention a few in a second, that are recurrent, they're real, and they're disabling to some level, even to the level that you can't work, even to the level that you can't get out of bed. So that's the first thing I want to say, is that they're real. The reason that they can be called mystery illnesses is because although they have a set of symptoms and a fairly defined set of symptoms, even though it may be a broad set, is that we don't know really what causes them. We don't know what triggers them. We don't know what makes them flare up and get better a lot of times. And so that's very challenging for the Western medical system, which is based on diagnosis, treat, better, right? So mystery illnesses fall into the category oftentimes of chronic disease, but they're not the same as chronic diseases like diabetes or things like that, where there's something known about the underlying mechanisms and there are ways to treat it with diet and medication and so forth. All bets are off. Now, some examples of mystery illnesses that people have probably heard of are fibromyalgia, IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, chronic fatigue. In Britain, they often call it ME, which I believe stands for myalgic myoencephalitis. It's a long name. Chronic fatigue syndrome. Here in the US, people with that same set of symptoms tend to get labeled as having fibromyalgia. It's not clear whether those things are identical or not, but symptoms include things like pain, which could be anywhere in the body, recurring pain, sometimes very severe pain, fatigue, hence the name chronic fatigue. And I want to mention that when we say fatigue, until I went through it, I didn't really understand what that meant. But when I was going through it, I would say that I had fatigue. And of course, nobody really understood what that means. So in a second, if we have time, I'd like to give a list of what that really meant. Okay. But another thing to not forget, because actually it's ironic that I was forgetting it. The most disabling part for me when I actually came down with a mystery illness was what's called brain fog. That one is harder to describe, but in essence, it's that you can't connect the dots, at least not the way that you used to, right? So with the kind of work that I used to do, I had a really kind of overdeveloped ability to connect dots. So for me in the early days, I didn't even realize what was happening because I was no longer working in the lab, but I was communicating but my ability to connect the dots was getting smaller and smaller. But in ordinary everyday conversations, people thought I was fine. And I thought I was fine on that front until it got so bad that really basic things I could no longer connect anymore. Like, for example, go to the grocery store and stop at the dry cleaners on the way became go to the grocery store. And I could not remember what the other thing was that made sense to do on that trip. Right? Mm-hmm. It's not the same as mild cognitive impairment, but it's sort of similar when you try to describe how it affects you on a day-to-day basis. And the most insidious part is that when you're no longer connecting the dots, You don't realize what's happening because you're not. It's like those cases of people who have oxygen deprivation who go up the mountain instead of down. Because in that state of hypoxia, they don't realize that what they need is more oxygen, right? So for me, and I think for many people, the brain fog is actually the worst part about these chronic mystery illnesses, because you don't realize what's happening. Your ability to pull yourself out or help yourself is diminished. But do you want to hear that list of symptoms that I promised?
Yes.
Okay, give me 1 second to open this up. One thing that was critical to me was my smartphone. If I didn't have a smartphone, I would carry a notebook all the time, because the old dot's not connecting. You got to write things down. So here's this list that I finally wrote down. I was staying with my sister, and I was planning to go see a new set of doctors, and plus one that I had seen before. And she said, well, write down your symptoms. Of course, we all know, write down your symptoms before you go to the doctor, right? So I wrote down what I could think of. I'm really tired all the time. I have trouble sleeping. And I feel really weak. And I have brain fog. And that's all I could think of, right? So then she sat down with me and she helped pull it out. So I would say one thing, and then she would say, so then what? And this is the list that came out. I get up, have breakfast, go for a walk for 30 minutes, and I'm so tired and weak after that I need to sit or lay down for the rest of the day. This is not ordinary tiredness, right? If I push to do more, then often I can't even get out of bed the next day other than to go to the bathroom and eat. I often have to take baths instead of showers because I feel like I'm going to faint if I remain standing. I can't sit upright for more than 3 to 4 hours per day before I feel faint and my whole upper body starts to hurt, muscle aches and pains. Sometimes I hurt all over for no obvious reason. Aches and sharp pains that can be anywhere. I have headaches that feel like pressure. I sometimes have to go up and down stairs 2 feet per step. Going up, I have to grab onto the rail, and by the time I get near the top, I have to pull myself up rather than step. If I start to do laundry, there's one I missed here. Going up, my legs feel so weak that they might give out from under me. That's why I have to pull. Then I have to go sit down to recuperate. If I start to do laundry or cook, I get dizzy and I have to sit down because I feel like I'm going to fall over. A lot of this came to light because I was doing dishes at my sister's and I was actually leaning with my elbows on the side of the sink in order to do it. And she looked at me and said, "Are you really that tired that you have to hold yourself up like that?" I'm like, "Yeah." Because I had become habituated to it. Some days it seems like I sleep 13 hours, but still am tired when I get up. I'm always tired when I get up. I'm never not tired. Some days I'm too tired to get out of bed at all. Some days I'm not able to think straight. I forget ordinary words, forget what I've done, forget what I've gone into a room for. I have to go back and forth 2 to 3 times to remember what I was doing before. I have to be careful about how far I drive. More than 20 minutes, I sometimes struggle to not fall asleep at the wheel. Can't work, and there were some digestive issues as well. So my only point in sharing that was that until my sister helped me pull it out and make it into a truly descriptive list, I wasn't really able to communicate with my doctors just how severe this was. And when I sat down with this list with the doctor I had seen before, who had basically just told me kind of nothing, my sister watched as I read the list, and she saw the doctor get very attentive and really start looking. And that's when I started to actually get some help from that particular set of doctors. So it's all fine to say, communicate with your doctor, but when you're in the midst of it, it can be tough. So it really helps to have somebody who can help you at this very detailed, granular level to address what you're dealing with. So that's an example of a mystery illness, which was diagnosed as different things at different times in my progression. When the pain showed up, which I didn't have throughout the whole thing, then it got diagnosed as fibromyalgia, but previously it had been called adrenal fatigue. And unfortunately, at a certain point, it was diagnosed as mold toxicity, which we can get into.
Why do we do that?
So the main thing that I want to get across in this is that mystery illnesses are real. I saw a great post on Facebook. It said, people with mystery illnesses aren't faking illness, they're faking wellness, right? And I was like, yes, that's really what goes on. How I got into this, of course, was that I got that sick. When I say I burned out, at first I thought it was, oh, my adrenals have been overworked, etc. I had moved house. I'd gone through a bunch of big stressors. Like I said, I had had major surgery. During surgery, I was at home, laid up, which will become significant when I tell you a little bit more of the story. I got to the point where I just wasn't coming back from the surgery. And I did go back to work, and I did okay for about a year, but then it got to where I couldn't tell if I was going to be able to show up for work the next day. And so I closed my lab, and I went through a period of 5 years of not being able to work at all. Got some of these initial diagnoses, started doing some of the things that were recommended that helped. But then ultimately, although I felt like I was starting to go back up, but then I got worse again. And I was working with integrative doctor who thought that this is the thing. Every specialist, this is what they're trying to do, is give you what they have, because hopefully that's going to make it all better, right? And I learned that everybody does this, and of course they do it. You give what you have, right? And so, so her thing was bioidentical hormones. And then finally, after years of tweaking and doing all these different things with nutrition and yada yada, the hormones were. She was so happy I came in. She said, "Your hormones are perfect." And I was like, "I feel worse than I have this whole time." And she was really stumped. So that's an example of a very typical journey with the mystery illness up until the point when I started to turn around.
Wow. Wonderful.
I love that we call it wonderful.
It is, when you hear and they just kind of fling labels about until they say, oh, it might be this one, and oh, let's give this label. Oh, let's give that label.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And of course you do it all because you're so desperate to get well. Oh, and I should mention that that you can spend, and people do, myself included, spend enormous amounts of money trying to find out what's wrong because you want to get better, right? It's not at all uncommon for a person to spend at the outset to go to a place that says, oh, we're going to figure out what's wrong with you, but just pay us $10,000 US up front. Right? And we do things like that. I didn't happen to do that particular one. It's a friend of mine. But you're so desperate. You're like, but this might make me well, so it would be worth it. That's a lot like that.
Yeah. And it's having the courage to look outside the box, really, isn't it? For your answer, ultimately. So for you, what were the top 3 approaches that helped you most in your recovery from your illness, mystery?
Right. Okay, so I'm going to organize these according to least, well, they're all 3 important, but the most important I'm going to leave at the end. So we're going to build up. Okay. Yeah. So the first thing I would say, and I should also mention before I start, that these are indeed the 3 individual things that gave me the most return on investment of time and money. But they were also some of the least expensive things, right? And the reason that I thought this would be useful, no matter where you are and what you're dealing with, to hear is that these 3 things would help you no matter what you're dealing with, right? So if you have a mystery illness, I recommend you might want to start here. I didn't start here. I ended up here. But you might find that no matter what else, even if they don't get you all the way to where you want to go, they'll be helpful. Okay, so one of them is to discontinue your exposure to toxins. Okay, so a lot of us have heard about all kinds of toxins in our environment. Me personally, I suspect that that's what's making so many people more sick than they've ever been. But that's just my opinion, right? I don't have data for that. The thing is, though, that when you're already in a state of really heavy brain fog, and you read a blog or you read a book and it says, yes, just do these 25 things and then you'll be okay, right? You're like, how do I do that, right? And so I want to say that on the topic of toxins in general, whatever you can do to make your air clean, your water and your food clean, and also your electronic environment relatively unpolluted, is a good thing to do, probably, okay? But the reason I'm stressing toxins per se is that, remember I said I had moved into a new house? Well, at this point of sheer desperation, I had been working with integrative doctors and practitioners for 10 years. I had perfect hormones, but I felt worse than ever. I started working with a person who I went to her to work on some spiritual growth, because obviously this was a challenging situation, right? And I'd already done some things, but I just felt, I took a class from her and I just felt like, there's something about this person. So I went up to her and I said, do you ever work with people one-on-one? She said, yes. Great. We set up an appointment. Turns out she was a channeler. Okay. And in our first session, now remember, I'm a scientist. So this is a world that I've become open and accustomed to, but I didn't start here. And I'm not asking anybody to believe anything about the mechanism, but I'll just tell you what happened. She said, there's an angel standing right here, pointing at your chest and saying, fungus. I had never thought about fungus, right? So I went to my doctor and I said, you can dismiss this as voodoo, but here's what happened. And I told her, and to her credit, this is an MD, right? She did not tell me to go see a psychotherapist. She said, well, there's a test for mold. I'm like, let's do it. So I was tested for the presence of mold toxins, and I had one of them. And then the question is, where are you being exposed? Because it's not normal to have, it's thought that it's not normal to have this in your system. And so I got my house tested, and the building inspector who did the tests told me that the spore count in the air was not just high, it was sky high. And so now I have this diagnosis that I have mold where it shouldn't be. My house is contaminated. So I had to move out and deal with that. And I went to a doctor who had actual experience with helping people recover from mold infections. And I showed her the results and on my first visit with her, and she looked at them, for the house inspection, for her to see what I'd been dealing with. And she said, usually when I see patients who have had this much exposure, they're not even able to talk straight. So the fact that I could walk through the door and sit down and be reasonably logical was a big thing, under these conditions, especially, or at least to her. So all of that is to say that what was going on is that when I had that surgery and then I stayed home to recover instead of going into work every day, I was breathing in these huge amounts of mold. And so I cannot say that my whole mystery illness was caused by mold, chicken or egg, right? What came first? It could have been that the weakness after the surgery made me vulnerable to mold, right? But ultimately, we ended up treating with antifungal drugs. We tried more natural things. They didn't seem to help. When I went through a 3-month course of these drugs, all of a sudden, one day, I realized my brain fog was at least 50% better. I was thinking at a level that I had not been able to think for years. And I had this sense of being my more normal self, not all the way back, but more like myself. And so I think it's worthwhile for anybody who's dealing with a mystery illness to get checked for mold, because it's virtually always overlooked, because in this country, at least, most doctors don't know the first thing about it, and it's just not on the radar. I'm not saying that it's going to be the cause, but it's worth eliminating. It's not so very expensive to test for it. And to actually test your body for it, I don't know, but that's expensive, but to test your environment is not really all that expensive. And I have a hunch that even if it doesn't necessarily cause all the things that I was talking about, it certainly has the potential to make things worse. And we know enough about studies of mold in lab settings to know that they kill, mold toxins kill certain cells that are important for immunity. They can kill certain types of mold toxin can kill neural cells. Fortunately, the one I was exposed to, the effects seem to be reversible. But like if mold crosses the blood-retina barrier, there are certain types that can make you go blind. There are very serious effects of mold infections. It's not something that you want. So in terms of discontinue exposure to toxins, I'd say, put that on the list. And otherwise, just try to be vigilant. Do your best to have the cleanest air, water, and food that you can. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that good sleep is absolutely paramount. And there is a lot that's written about how to get good sleep. And of course, I knew I was having a problem with sleep through this whole journey. I had bad insomnia back when I worked. Then it seemed like I was sleeping all the time. But when I actually paid attention, this is after some of the brain fog lifted, it occurred to me, what's happening with my sleep? Because it seems like I'm in bed, I'm never rested, but I'm waking up a lot. So then I started logging what was happening. I realized I was waking up every 2 hours. So basically I was going through probably a sleep cycle and then waking up. I was waking up hot. And so just reading more about, sleep, I thought, I need some help with this. Well, also my internist, who now was taking serious the fact that I had, quote, fibromyalgia, one of the things they do recommend these days is to be tested, to have a sleep study done to test for sleep apnea. And if anybody has this recommendation, or even if you haven't, but you haven't done it yet, I highly recommend following through, because it turned out I did have what's called moderate sleep apnea. And moderate means that you stop breathing in my case, 12 times an hour. So it can be actually much higher. There are many, many deleterious effects of sleep apnea. Here's the thing. They gave me a CPAP machine. There are a couple ways you can deal with it. This was the one that they gave me. At first, I didn't notice any difference at all. I was like, oh, bummer. I thought this was going to really help. It took 3 months, and then all of a sudden, I started realizing that I was waking up feeling like I had gotten some rest. Then I talked with somebody who actually has a certification in sleep medicine. He's a dentist. He's not a medical doctor, but he also often has patients with sleep issues. So he had done this training, and I was talking with him, and he said, it takes about 3 months for a CPAP to fully take effect. And that was after I had realized, for me, that it had all started changing after about 3 months. So if you're doing something to improve your sleep, like using a CPAP, make sure you stay with it long enough to see an effect. Don't leave before the miracle happens, basically. For me, another piece that was really important was being cool enough while I slept. And I think that for different individuals, the particular issue that's interfering with sleep can be different. But for me, having a bed that was comfortable, I got a buckwheat pillow that supports my neck but doesn't get all hot. I got a thing called a chili pad that actually cools or warms the bed while you sleep so that your body stays at a more even temperature. And once I started employing all of those things, I started for the first time in decades actually being able to sleep for 7 hours straight, which is like, yay, right? So as I said, the path to getting that better sleep will probably vary by individuals, but no matter what, the sleep is paramount, because that's when your body does its best healing. And the third thing that was extraordinarily important and made a huge difference was having a practice that let me connect to the teacher within.
Yeah.
I don't think it necessarily matters what practice you have as long as it works for you. The one, it could be cognitive behavioral therapy. I didn't mean to diss psychotherapists before. I'm just saying my doctor took me seriously. That was the point of that. It could be cognitive behavioral therapy. It could be Reiki, it could be all kinds of, spiritual and mind-body practices. For some people get great results using MBSR, for example. But for me, the practice that I teach, that is the backbone of the work that I do with people, is one called Integrative Restoration Yoga Nidra. And I love this practice for many reasons. One is that when I first started doing it, I wasn't even looking anymore for a way to heal my PTSD. I had complex PTSD since childhood. I had been told it wasn't curable, right? I wasn't even looking for a solution. But when I started Yoga Nidra, within 2 sessions, the PTSD started breaking up and dissolving. And it was completely, totally gone within 2 years, but it was about 90+% gone in about 3 to 4 months. It's a fantastic practice for improving your situation if you have PTSD and potentially healing it fully. It's a practice that integrates mind, body, and spirit. And I say this with my proud colors as a scientist, that we have to attend to our spirit. And when we don't, bad things happen in the realm of thought and health and so forth. The other thing that I like about it for people like myself who were just dealing with so much and the overwhelm is that it is a one-stop shop. So in this practice, you learn some very profoundly basic techniques that give you profoundly big results. And you can keep going back to these techniques every time you have an issue, whether it's some kind of upset, whether it's a feeling of spiritual disconnect, whether it's a physical issue. It's incredibly effective at managing pain, which is why I think I did not have pain for most of my journey through quote unquote fibromyalgia, which I think probably was secondary to mold toxicity. In my own case and in people that I've worked with, you can go from 6 or 7 on the scale of pain all the way down to 3 or 0. So it's very effective in helping you to manage pain, both emotional and physical. It's also a practice that gives you a certain kind of confidence in yourself and in life. It connects you to your true nature, that which remains when everything else is gone. It helps you to realize that you're safe when outer appearances would suggest otherwise. But at the same time, if you're actually truly not safe, it's not going to delude you. And everyone I know who uses this practice and teaches it reports that with their clients, that no matter what the issue is, it gets better. So I've worked with clients who've had bipolar who go all the way to not needing medication anymore. It alleviates depression, anxiety, you name it. If it's the right practice for that person, it can really change their situation. And even in cases where it's not going to fundamentally provide the tools to heal everything, it can at least improve the situation so that, for example, lower doses of medications are called for and so forth. So I like it as a sort of backbone, one-stop shop. The emotional challenges of dealing with any chronic illness or any chronic upsetting condition, and especially mystery illnesses where so much is not known, the emotional challenges are enormous. So having a practice that lets you experience the normal range of emotions, but not get trapped or stuck in depression or anxiety or anger or pain, these are enormous. So I had actually discovered iRest and healed from PTSD using it before the mystery illness really set in. And over, I would go to doctors and they would say things like, wow, I'm amazed you could walk through the door given your blood test results. I'm like, thank you. Right. I guess that's good. But I've always attributed it to the iRest practice. And I never would have expected, but this is something that apparently I've been gifted to do. I knew almost immediately when I started practicing it myself that I needed to teach other people. And so in my career as a scientist, I was really focused on research, finding out, what's at the root of things, mentoring, because teaching others and training others is always a part of the process, and breaking through glass ceilings. Probably the earlier ones, I didn't even know I was doing that, but eventually I got to a place where I couldn't ignore the fact that I was in some ways a fish out of water and highly visible because I was different, right? Where I would work on a floor with 60 men and I was the only woman who wasn't a secretary or a dishwasher, right? And those are great jobs. We're indispensable. I don't mean to be elitist about this, but the point is that I kept getting to levels that women tend not to. And I was told, oh, you'll never get there because you're a girl, right? So I really started to hone in on what does it take to break glass ceilings, right? I finally realized when I was dealing with these issues of mystery illness and even PTSD, that in a way they create a glass ceiling. It's something that you don't seem to know how to break through, and nobody seems to be able to tell you how to break through. It's holding you back, and it really hurts in some fashion, emotional or physical. So I actually think that what I am doing now in terms of the work that I do with people is really helping people to break through their own glass ceiling. And sometimes that's working with an executive who wants to break through the traditional, success ladder glass ceiling. And sometimes it's somebody who's dealing with chronic pain or chronic anger or PTSD or you name it, the whole list. So it really doesn't matter where you start. We talk a lot in the sort of alternative and higher consciousness community about inner blocks. But I think some of these conditions are more like glass ceilings because we're not just creating them ourselves. Now, some people would say we create everything ourselves. I'm not trying to, get into a debate about that. But let's just say that there are external conditions. We have this concept in biology of being permissive. You can have an external condition that is permissive for growth if you supply all the growth factors, but you can have an external environment that's not permissive. And no matter how many growth factors you have, and no matter how many blocks you take away, you can still hit some kind of limitation on your growth until you hit on the way to get beyond it, right? So I'm not saying they're not breakable. I mean, they're glass after all, right? But in terms of, don't blame yourself. Do look for what's within yourself because that's where the power to heal comes from. And stay out of the blame game.
Yeah. Wow. Powerful stuff, Florence. I'm just loving you sitting and listening to you, and you're so charismatic with it too. And
thank you. Well, I just want to reiterate one more time. Take a nice full breath. Hope. It can happen for me. And no matter what happens, I am okay and I will be okay. And there is hope. For me too. And you can come back whenever you're ready.
Absolutely wonderful note to conclude on, I would say. And it's been absolutely wonderful and a joy sharing you and in all your knowledge and your wisdom that you have around so many things that will help so many people. If you want to connect with Florence, you can connect with her directly through the website itsatoughworldouthere.com, and she'll be happy to assist you with anything that she can help you with, which is a vast range of things.
Yes. Yeah. And if you're feeling like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed, reach out anyway. because I believe in starting from where you are and working with what you can. And that's how you'll chip your way out of it.
Oh, pearl after pearl after pearl. Wonderful, Florence.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. This has been a real treat. I really appreciate your inviting me. Thank you.